Hi, welcome back to episode 2 of Epsteinland. This episode is titled Bailout Capitalism, Heads I Win, Tails You Lose, which will be self-explanatory in a second. First, I want to tell you about a deal. Not a secret deal, not a backroom deal, a deal that was made in plain sight. Celebrated in the pages of the New York Times, cheered at Davos, taught in business schools, and handed a Nobel Prize. The deal goes like this. When the powerful win, they keep everything. When they lose, you pay. We all pay. That's it. That's the deal. Heads I win, tails you lose. This is bailout capitalism, and by the time this episode is over, you'll see it everywhere. In your hospital bill, in your pension, in the price of your groceries, in the story of every town that lost its factory and got an opioid epidemic instead. Let's follow the money. I want to start with something a little unexpected. Mitt Romney. In 2012, Romney was at a private fundraiser at the home of John Schnatter, the founder of Papa John's Pizza. A massive estate, wealthy donors assembled. I remember he had a little golf green that was perfectly manicured. Romney looked out at that property and he said, "Republicans come here and say everyone should live like this." That comment has stayed with me for over a decade. Not because it was cruel, I think he meant it sincerely. He was describing an aspiration, his aspiration, for what America could be. But here's the question that haunts that remark. In a world where everyone lives like that, where the highest aspiration is the estate, the pool, the golf course, who's left to do everything else? Who's your doctor, your nurse? Who's your children's teacher? Who drives them to school? Who's the hospice worker sitting with your parent at 3 a.m. in the morning? Who's the landscaper maintaining the very estate you're standing on while you say everyone should live like this? Should the gardener have an estate like this? A society cannot function if everyone is climbing the same narrow ladder while looking down at the people whose essential work keeps that ladder standing. And not for nothing, but who advances science, technology, medicine, the arts, if we all pursue avarice in business? This is not an attack on Romney. It's a question about what we actually value and what kind of economy we've built and want to build. The same presumption runs deeper than one fundraiser. That same year, Romney told a group of college students, "Take a shot, go for it, take a risk. Borrow money if you have to from your parents. Start a business." Borrow money from your parents, as if every family has $20,000 or millions sitting in a drawer waiting for their kid's entrepreneurial moment. And it's not just politicians. I heard recently about a graduate student who was running out of funding and was going to be forced to abandon his studies. His academic advisor looked at him and said, "Can't you just tap into your family money? Can't you just tap into your family money?" Guy was not a villain, not a bad person, just someone for whom that question was completely natural. Someone who had lived their entire life in a world where family money was a thing that you could tap into. That is the worldview this episode is about. Not malice, presumption. The presumption that everyone operates from the same starting position, that the board isn't rigged, that the ladder is available to everyone equally, that the only variable is how hard you're willing to climb. It isn't, and the data we're about to show proves it. Here's where the physician in me has to say something that might surprise you. The behavior of the Epstein class, the entitlement, the rule-breaking, the casual disregard for consequences, is not simply a moral failing. It has a neurological basis. Power suppresses empathy. This is not an off-the-cuff observation. It's neuroscience. Research from McMaster University shows that individuals primed to feel powerful exhibit reduced mirror neuron activity. Mirror neurons are the neural basis of empathy, the mechanism by which we feel what others feel. Power literally damps them down. Research from UC Berkeley shows that wealthier individuals are measurably more likely to cheat, to break rules, and to rationalize their unethical behavior. Not because rich people are born bad, because wealth and power change the brain. Paul Piff at UC Irvine ran a now famous experiment. He rigged a Monopoly game. One player got twice the starting money, collected twice the salary when they passed go, and rolled the dice twice for each time his opponent rolled once. Everything was stacked, insurmountably. in the favor of in their favor. And here's what happened. The winning player, who knew the game was rigged, who had done nothing to earn the advantage, began to act entitled. They moved their pieces more loudly, they took up more physical space, they became ruder to their opponent. And when asked afterward why they had won, they talked about their own skill and strategy. They forgot the rigged board entirely. They internalized their superiority. Now, imagine that experiment running not for an hour, but for a lifetime. Inherited wealth, private schools, the right connections from birth. The board rigged before you ever even sat down to play. This is not character assassination. This is the major pathology of American life and a public health problem. And there is a difference between wealth that was built and wealth that was inherited. Earned wealth, at least in theory, requires something. Judgment, risk, work, and as many, maybe most, would also admit, luck plays a role. Inherited wealth requires nothing. It arrives before the recipient has done anything, before they have been tested by failure, by loss, by the ordinary friction of living in a world without a safety net. Donald Trump was on the payroll of his father's company at age 3. Elon Musk grew up with the proceeds of a family emerald mine in apartheid-era South Africa. These are not self-made men. These are men who inherited a rigged board and then told everyone else they won fair and square. Theodore Roosevelt understood this more than a century ago. In his 6th annual message to Congress in 1906, he said that the transmission of enormous wealth to young men does not do them any real service and is of great and genuine detriment to the community at large. That was in 1906, at the end of the Gilded Age, of which TR was both a beneficiary and a scourge. Teddy Roosevelt telling his class that inherited wealth damages the heirs and harms the society. We have not gotten more sophisticated since then. We have gotten more captured. So how does bailout capitalism actually work? Let me show you the machinery. Deregulation, private profits on the way up, then a crash and losses, yours, ours, then repeat. Let's take Lawrence Summers. He was Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton, Harvard President Obama's chief economic advisor during the 2008 crisis. Summers was one of the key architects of the financial deregulation of the 1990s, the loosening of banking rules, the repeal of Glass-Steagall, the decision to leave derivatives unregulated. These were not accidents. These were policy choices championed by people like Summers that allowed Wall Street to build an enormous, leveraged, interconnected house of cards. When the house of cards collapsed in 2008, destroying 8 million jobs, 5 million homes, trillions in retirement savings, Summers did not face consequences. He got a seat in the Obama administration. He helped shape the bailout response. The architects of the disaster were handed the keys to the reconstruction. And even after Jeffrey Epstein's 2008 conviction as a sex offender, Summers still treated him as a useful contact, another node in the network, not a pariah, a resource. This is bailout capitalism in human form. And then there's Lloyd Blankfein, CEO of Goldman Sachs. In November 2009, 1 year after the crash that Goldman's own practices helped create, Blankfein told the London Times that Goldman's employees were among the most productive in the world, and that Goldman Sachs was, his words, doing God's work. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Doing God's work. While millions of families were losing their homes, while workers were watching their retirements evaporate, while communities across the country were gutted, he was doing God's work. I'm going to guess Jesus would have been overturning the tables in the Goldman Sachs lobby, given the opportunity. How did we get here? How did doing God's work become a defensible thing to say out loud? The intellectual permission slip was written in 1970 by Milton Friedman in the New York Times Magazine. His argument was that the only legitimate goal of a corporation was shareholder value. Any executive who considered broader obligations to workers, to communities, to the nation was guilty of pure and unadulterated socialism. Friedman didn't invent greed. He laundered it. He gave the Epstein class a Nobel credentialed argument for doing exactly what they wanted to do anyway: extract maximum value, externalize every cost, and dismiss Theodore Roosevelt's benefit to the community standard as the naive fantasy of lesser minds. The shareholder primacy doctrine that followed, enforced by hedge funds, perfected by private equity, celebrated at Davos, immortalized by Gordon Gekko in 1987's Wall Street, is the direct intellectual ancestor of the leveraged buyout, the stock buyback, the too big to fail bailout, and ultimately the moral universe in which Jeffrey Epstein's usefulness to the powerful outweighed his crimes against the powerless. Economist Mariana Mazzucato puts it precisely: finance does not create value. It captures gains from public investment and other people's labor. Goldman Sachs' profit trace to too big to fail protections and public subsidies, not to some managerial genius that justifies doing God's work. To families in stagnant wage gig hell, the boasting is not just wrong, it is obscene. This is not the first time America has faced this choice, and we have made the right choice before. Theodore Roosevelt, in his New Nationalism speech at Osawatomie, Kansas in 1910, said, "No man should receive $1 unless that dollar has been fairly earned. Every dollar received should represent $1's worth of service rendered, not gambling in stocks, but service rendered." That is a direct indictment of bailout capitalism from a Republican president in 1910. Roosevelt trust-busted J.P. Morgan's networks. He used the power of democratic government to restrain concentrated wealth because he understood that you cannot have democracy and concentrated wealth at the same time. Franklin Roosevelt went further. After the Depression, he built Glass-Steagall to separate commercial and investment banking. He created the SEC. He built the architecture of social insurance, the idea that the risks of a modern economy should be shared, not dumped on individuals. The post-war equilibrium that followed was not perfect. It was racially stratified in ways that deliberately excluded Black Americans from its benefits: the GI Bill, FHA loans, and union jobs. That caveat is essential. But the basic principle that democratic government can redirect the terms of the economy was proven to work. Then came Reagan. Government is not the solution. Government is the problem. Deregulation, union busting, tax cuts tilted to the top, the systemic dismantling of the Roosevelt settlement. The Epstein class did not stumble into power. They were walked into it deliberately by people who knew exactly what they were doing and who would benefit. And here's what happened next. Since about 1981, just as Reagan's tax cuts and his philosophy took hold, the top 10% has seen their income grow by 170%. The middle 40% of earners, 60%. The bottom 50%, just 19%. The board was already rigged, and then they tilted it further. And when you look at wealth, not just income, the picture is even more extreme. The top 0.1% of Americans, roughly 12,000 families, have seen their wealth grow by more than 2,100%, $630 million on average since 1976. The bottom 50%, their total wealth gains over the same period, $6,500. Not per year, total, in nearly 50 years. So much for a rising tide lifting all boats. That is not a market outcome. That is a policy choice, and it was made deliberately. I want to close the argument of this episode with something that might sound provocative, but is actually straightforward. Fixing the inheritance tax is a societal and public health intervention. If we know from peer-reviewed research that extreme inherited wealth suppresses empathy, distorts judgment, and produces the entitled rule-breaking behavior that characterized the Epstein class, then allowing unlimited dynastic wealth transmission is a public health decision. It is a decision to manufacture, generation after generation, a class of people neurologically conditioned to see themselves as above the rules. Theodore Roosevelt said it plainly in 1910. We should permit a fortune to be gained only so long as the gaining represents benefit to the community. That is not radical. It is the oldest proposition in the American creed, and it is time to say it again. We have followed the money today. We have seen the mechanism: deregulation, extraction, bailout, repeat. We have met the man who gave it an intellectual permission slip, and we have seen that this is not inevitable, that Americans have broken this cycle before, and we can break it again. In the next episode, we're going to talk about how bailout capitalism hardwired itself into our politics. Citizens United, dark money, the billionaire auction of American democracy. We'll talk about why you have never heard of most of the people who are funding the dismantling of your rights. And we will talk about what Anat Shenker-Osorio means when she says that the way we talk about these things is just about as important as the things themselves. If this episode resonated with you, share it. The people in your life who are angry about the economy are not wrong. They have just been handed the wrong explanations and the wrong villains. The right explanation is this: the game is rigged by design, and we have the receipts. I'm Chris Hughes, and I'll see you in episode 3. Thanks.